Act to implement budget measures and to enact and amend various statutes, and it now be read for the first time.
Mr. Bethlenfalvy has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to Enact and Amend Various Statutes, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried. Carried. Thank you.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to Enact and Amend Various Statutes. First reading of the bill, première lecture du projet de loi.
Would the member like to briefly speak to the bill?
I notice the emphasis on briefly, Madam Speaker. I look forward to speaking to this bill during my ministerial statement.
Introduction of government bills. Introduction of bills. Statements by the Ministry. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to everyone at Queen's Park here. It's an honor to stand before you for my 10th time to deliver a fall economic statement or a budget. You know, over the years, I've had the honor to introduce a number of budgets and fall economic statements, and as I'm sure you have noticed, over the years, I dedicate my speech to a loved one. I have often dedicated my speeches to my father or my mother, and sadly, my father passed away this past summer. His love of country, his role model as a father, his guidance will continue to shape who I am. Thank you. And may the work that all of us do in this Legislative Assembly help leave this world in a better place than we found it, and may future generations learn from the lessons from those who came before. So with that, Madam Speaker, au nom du Premier Ministre Doug Ford.
On behalf of Premier Doug Ford and our entire Government of Ontario, it is my honor today to present to you the 2025 Ontario Fall Economic Statement, a plan to protect Ontario.
Ford, Premier Doug Ford, and our entire Government of Ontario, it is my honor today to present to you the 2025 Ontario Fall Economic Statement, a plan to protect Ontario. Today, Madam Speaker, Ontario finds itself in a very different place than we did 7 years ago. In many ways, things are much better. Since we were first elected in 2018, this government and this Premier have turned our province's course towards one of success, one of growth, and one of prosperity. And in fact, we've seen our economy climb to new heights with a GDP of $1.2 trillion, over $350 billion higher than it was in 2018. Madam Speaker, we have provided confidence and certainty to markets, investors, and job creators at untold speed, adding close to 1 million more jobs in Ontario and mobilizing the greatest workforce that Canada has to offer. Hear, hear. So it's with sincere thanks that I say thank you, Premier, for your leadership. Madam Speaker, you show me a map of Ontario, and I will show you a place where the future is already taking place. This growth came not just from success alone, but from prudent investments. And I say prudent, Madam Speaker, because our government has worked hard to lay a strong fiscal foundation. In fact, Ontario closed the fiscal year with a deficit of $1.1 billion and a debt-to-GDP ratio of 36.2%, the lowest in over a decade. As importantly, we've also seen the cost of servicing Ontario's debt come down $1.3 billion lower than expected, and the cost of servicing that debt hit a 40-year low of 5.5%, freeing up room to reinvest in the priorities that drive long-term prosperity, like infrastructure, like tax relief, and our world-class skilled workforce. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Ontario received 2 credit rating upgrades, one from S&P and one from Morningstar DBRS. Madam Speaker, all 4 major rating agencies now affirm Ontario's strong AA rating, a clear signal that investors and markets have confidence in this province's fiscal and economic direction. Now, with our finances in the best shape they've been in over a decade, we are in a strong position to act for Ontario. But we know the road ahead is not without challenges. As a province and as a country, we find ourselves in the midst of trade uncertainty that we did not ask to be part of, causing anxiety for workers and businesses alike. Mais, Madame le Président, ce qui nous distingue.
Madam Speaker, we are different from other nations. We are Canadian. I have never met a Canadian that wasn't ready to put up a fight to defend themselves.
From other nations facing this challenge is that we are Canadian. And I've never met a Canadian that wasn't ready to put up a fight to defend themselves like this Premier. It was with that spirit that our government decided to act, and act quickly, to protect our businesses, to protect our workers and families, to protect our economy, and to protect our way of life. And thanks to the prudent fiscal management we've maintained over the years, we are in a strong position to act for Ontario. We have already announced nearly $30 billion in relief and supports for tariff-impacted businesses and workers to unleash our economy. And that money is flowing right now to keep our economic engine going. Flowing, for example, through our Ontario Together Trade Fund, which is currently leveraging $50 million in support for small and medium-sized businesses by enabling them to pivot production, build new sales relationships, and expand through greater interprovincial trade. And today, I am proud to share that to continue helping them diversify into new markets and boost their trade resiliency, our government is investing an additional $100 million into the fund for a grand total of $150 million. And, Madam Speaker, as we work together to build stronger communities, we must also work to build up the vital industries that sustain them. Our $5 billion Protecting Ontario account, which is providing up to $1 billion in liquidity to tariff-affected sectors like steel, aluminum, copper, and auto manufacturing, is helping them meet large operational challenges like payroll, lease, and utility payments. And as a matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, the federal government joined us in announcing an historic $500 million loan to support Algoma Steel and their workers to help. And this will help Algoma maintain operations, reduce reliance on the U.S., and support economic growth in Northern Ontario. We did so not only because we need to support Northern Ontario, but we need to ask ourselves, do we want to have a steel industry in this country?
Yes.
A manufacturing base and industry, including the North?
Yes.
An infrastructure industry that uses Ontario-produced steel?
Yes.
Madam Speaker, I boldly submit that the answer to those questions is an emphatic yes. As the leading economic engine of our great nation, Ontario must continue to stand out amongst the provinces and territories and lead by example. We have accomplished already much to free up trade within Canada, becoming the first province to lift all barriers under the Canada Free Trade Agreement, and empowering Ontario businesses impacted by tariffs to find new markets and find new supply chains within Canada. And we're doing this and more, Madam Speaker, because it is a sensible thing to do for our future, a future where Canada's #1 trading partner is Canada. A future where the single greatest place to invest, grow, and succeed in the entire G7 is right here in Ontario, supporting all of Canada. And our future is bright indeed, Madam Speaker. We must seize these changing times in order to deliver the projects that will reshape our standing in the global economy, not just for today, but for generations to come. And by working together, being bold and having a vision, can we get on with building a nation? We've done it before, Madam Speaker. When former Premier John Robarts had a vision to build Canada's first nuclear plants right here in Ontario during the 1960s, almost 60 years ago, he forever changed our nation's energy landscape and our economic future. And now, Premier Ford has the vision for the next 60 years, the vision for generations to come. We will do it again. You know, because, Madam Speaker, Ontario has a proud legacy operating the safest and most reliable nuclear facilities in the world. But with energy demand set to rise so significantly over the next 25 years, now is the time to leverage Ontario's proven nuclear advantage so that we can create more good-paying jobs, grow our economy, and power our future. Recently, I was fortunate to join Premier Ford and Prime Minister Carney to announce an historic joint investment with the federal government of $3 billion to build the first small modular reactors anywhere in the G7, right here in Ontario, right in Darlington. And, Madam Speaker, that project alone will create 18,000 construction jobs and another 3,700 jobs to operate and generate enough energy to power the equivalent of 1.2 million homes. We're doing it all here in Ontario, Madam Speaker, and we're moving full steam ahead with refurbishment of Ontario's existing fleet of nuclear generating stations. And we're expanding new opportunities for large-scale nuclear energy at the Bruce Nuclear Plant, as well as the OPG, Ontario Power Generation's Wesleyville site in Port Hope. And you know, Madam Speaker, that will power almost 16 million homes. Wow. But we need the federal government to come to the table in support of large-scale nuclear in Ontario. I know Premier Ford has spoken to Prime Minister Carney about that, because that's what visionary leaders do. I spoke this morning and met with François-Philippe Champagne, who tabled his budget on Tuesday, to share that vision and get support, because the day will come that working together, we will continue to be a global energy superpower. And we're not stopping there. Last week, Premier Ford and Minister Rickford signed an historic agreement with Webequie First Nation that could see shovels in the ground on the road to Ring of Fire by next June. And this road will transform Indigenous and Northern communities, support economic reconciliation, and unlock critical minerals that could generate $22 billion to grow Ontario's economy and protect every worker in every part of the province. We're also speeding up the construction of projects that give us a critical advantage through a one project, one process system. To streamline approvals and environmental assessments, And just last week, Minister Lecce announced that Frontier Lithium's world-class PAK lithium project north of Red Lake would be the first to move forward under this framework, bringing us one step closer to unlocking the full potential of our metals and mining sector. What's more, our $500 million critical minerals processing fund will help us unleash Ontario's vast mineral reserves onto international markets. With Ontario minerals right here, mined in Ontario, refined in Ontario, by Ontario workers. Madam Speaker, this is what being a critical minerals powerhouse looks like. Madam Speaker, the future is at our doorstep. And when the future calls, Ontario answers that call. High-growth industries of tomorrow, like artificial intelligence, defense, and advanced manufacturing, are all part of Ontario's future. All we need to do is reach for them. And through the remaining streams of our $4 billion Protecting Ontario account, we will leverage the private capital necessary to fortify our economy, drive innovation, and attract the best talent. Madam Speaker, this is what being a global AI and technology powerhouse looks like. And Madam Speaker, we are standing on the shoulders of those who built this nation before us, and history remembers those accomplishments. And when history remembers the work that we've done here today together, future generations will look back and they will say, this is what nation building looks like. Because nation building is at the heart of Ontario's economic success, Madam Speaker, and protecting Ontario is at the heart of this government's plan. But at that heart of Ontario itself lie our communities, our families, our workers, our businesses, our students, our seniors, and everyone who calls this beautiful province home. We work for them, Madam Speaker. With tariffs making an already uncertain world even more challenging and unpredictable, our government set out to keep costs down and put more money back in Ontario's pockets. Madam Speaker, not only have we never raised a tax on the people and business of Ontario, we've in fact cut taxes and we've cut fees. And that's why I'm pleased to share that in this year alone, our government is enabling $11.5 billion in financial relief for people and families and $11.7 billion in cost savings for businesses, including $5.6 billion of which would go directly to helping small businesses. And we're going to keep going, keep finding more ways to lower taxes and fees and drive our economy. Just last week, I was with Minister Flack to announce an additional measure that Ontario is removing the full 8% provincial portion of the HST for first-time home buyers to keep the dream of home ownership alive for countless young families across the province. That's putting more money back in the pockets of Ontarians. It's just one part of our plan to build stronger communities. Our plan tackles health and well-being of people and families. People deserve the right care in the right place. And sometimes the right place is at home. Who doesn't want to age at home, Madam Speaker, comfortably and close to their family and loved ones? That's why I'm proud to say that our government, along with Mr. Jones, is investing an additional $1.1 billion over the next 3 years into home care, which will increase consistency in hours of care and reduce wastefulness. Thank you, Mr. Jones. So in conclusion, Madam Speaker, I would like to leave you with a message that I feel resonates strongly in our nation now. One which I hope serves as a reminder to all members of this legislature that no matter the cost, no matter the difficulty, no matter our differences, there's nothing worth fighting for more than our shared home, our shared way of life, and our shared communities. In fact, it was Prime Minister Brian Mulroney who once said, leaders must have vision, and they must find the courage to fight for policies that will give that vision life. Leaders must govern not for easy headlines in 10 days, but for a better Canada in 10 years. Thank you, Prime Minister Mulroney. Thank you, Minister Mulroney. Madam Speaker, let us place trust in one another to build a better Canada, not just for 10 years, but for generations to come. Let us never be kept from doing what it takes to do our job, protecting the more than 16 million people who call Ontario home. Let us keep working together. And in that spirit, Madam Speaker, I once again wish to renew the call I made to our colleagues from the NDP, from the Liberals, the Greens, and the independent members earlier this year when I introduced our historic 2025 budget, to set aside our differences and join us in support of this bill, regardless of political parties and stripes, in doing what is necessary to protect the workers, the families, the businesses, and the communities and economy of Ontario. Let's work together, build out a vision for a strong, reliant, and growing Canada, not just for the next 10 years, but for the next 100 years. Come and join us. Madam Speaker, this fall economic statement is more than an update on our government's plan. It's a reminder that in the face of enormous challenges, our nation must stay the course. These trying times demand we maintain a steady fiscal hand and work to restore balance. They demand that we protect our workers and businesses and national industries from uncertainty. They demand we build projects worthy of a nation whose economic strength is matched only by the strength of their people. They demand we welcome the world with open arms and say, come do business with us all. And most importantly, Madam Speaker, they demand we protect Ontario. Madam Speaker, now more than ever, we need to unleash our economy and make Ontario the most competitive place in the G7 to invest, create jobs, and do business. Thank you, and God bless the people of Ontario.
The member for University Rosedale.
Thank you, Speaker. Today we are debating the fall economic statement, and we have just listened to the Conservatives present a very rose-tinted glasses view of the government and their economy. It is jarring to hear the Minister of Finance talk about prudent fiscal management when this government is on track to be $500 billion in debt in the next few years. It says it in the same economic statement. Over 700,000 people woke up today without a job. Workers at Stellantis, Honda, Espanola, Terrace Bay. The 10,000 workers at colleges and universities who've lost their job because of declining international enrolment and this government's cuts. The 1 in 4 young people who woke up today without a job. This morning, 1.7 million Ontarians who rent they're going to wonder between now and at the end of the month when their rent is due. They're going to look at their bank statement and they're going to wonder how they are going to make ends meet. I think about the many Ontarians I talk to when I go to the supermarket who are shocked at the price of everything. This morning, I was at the Fort York Spadina Food Bank with my leader and the member for Fort York Spadina. It's one of the busiest food banks in the country. When you go, the line tracks down the street, well before it's open. There are over 1 million visits to food banks in Ontario every single year. And when we ask the executive director of the food bank, who is it that's now going to these food banks, her response is that it's people aged 18 to 49 who are workers, who are standing in the cold for hours to get basic staples like milk, eggs, produce, meat, and cereal. And that is the truth about this economy today in Ontario. We have an affordability crisis. Our province is hemorrhaging jobs. And the services that we rely upon, public transit, healthcare, education, our court system, the landlord and tenant board, they are all buckling under the strain of delivering good services when their funding is being cut year in and year out since 2018. That's the truth of it. So now we have this fall economic statement being presented here today. You know, just to put this in context, we've been back in the legislature for how long? 8 days after a nice 137-day break, working hard. And we have got the Premier doing his usual blustering shtick of playing the blame game, where Ontario's troubles are everyone else's troubles. It's everyone else's fault. It's young people, they don't look hard enough for a job. It's the federal government. It's Trump. Real leaders stand up and develop plans to care for Ontario and invest in Ontario. They don't blame. All this week, this government has been sitting in the stink of the Skills Development Fund scandal, wrestling with the uncomfortable truth that they have handed out millions to adult education nightclubs and companies who've made big donations to their party, when that money should be going to workers to help them retrain for jobs. It should be going to public colleges and universities to help young people get an education. That's where it should be going, and it's not. So when we look at the details of this fall economic statement, what we see is cuts. When you factor in population growth and need and inflation, we see cuts. We see cuts to education. If parents thought that the kids' school is going to be improved as a result of what we see in the fall economic statement, that they're going to be very disappointed. What this fall economic statement shows us is we are on track for larger class sizes, more violence in schools, and lower education outcomes. That's what we see. If we're talking about healthcare, if you are a patient, if you are a loved one caring for a patient, you would hope that this government would invest more in healthcare so you can get timely access to surgery, so you can see a family doctor. Well, what you are going to see with this fall economic statement and what the plan is you are going to see cuts, emergency room closures, long wait times for surgeries, and burned out staff and declining healthcare quality. That is what this fall economic statement is telling us is in store for Ontarians this year and next year. That's what it shows. I think this government could do a whole lot better. And on this side of the House, we are going to be pushing for real investment in the services that we care about, real investment in the sectors that matter, and a plan to create and keep jobs in this province. Thank you.
Response, I recognize the member for Don Valley West.
Thank you, Speaker. It's an honour to rise today to respond to the fall economic statement. And like with the spring budget, we have the Finance Minister and government ads telling us that everything is rosy, when in fact, even their own numbers, Speaker, tell a very different story. Earlier this week, a transformational federal budget was delivered. Yet, how did the Ontario Finance Minister describe it? He called it tinkering. Well, Speaker, if that's tinkering, then we can only describe the Ontario fall economic statement one way: teeny tiny tinkering. So back to what really matters in a budget and a fall economic statement. It's the numbers, and the numbers are very telling. They tell us that everything economic, everything to do with jobs and how this government spends taxpayer money is getting worse. Unemployment already at a 13-year high, it's going to get worse. Housing starts, already one of the worst in the country, they're going to get worse. What we need, Speaker, is more housing to make it more affordable for families, for people trying to buy their first homes, and yet housing starts are going down, Speaker. That's not the solution we wanted. So with all of this in mind, and with the bluster that the government side comes to this house each and every day, blaming U.S. tariffs for all the woes in Ontario, when in fact unemployment's been rising for 9 quarters under this government, Speaker. That's about 7 quarters before U.S. tariffs. So, Speaker, you would think that that kind of government that campaigned on in an early, unnecessary, expensive election to protect Ontario would have made some changes in this document to meet the moment. But what new spending do we see in the fall economic statement, Speaker? Look at page 152. It's right there. Contingency fund aside, there is a mere $608 million in new spending. Speaker, in a 200-page document about the state of our economy, about the challenges that we face, full of economic indicators that show a deteriorating job situation for the people of Ontario, which we read about every day, with unemployment among youth at 17.8%, the worst in the country, Speaker. During a time of great economic uncertainty for auto workers, for manufacturing workers, for education workers, for hospital workers who are toiling under the poor policy decisions of this government, we see no new money for those programs, Speaker. In fact, we see about as much as they spent on the scandalous Skills Development Fund. So to the minister, I say, you can't have it both ways. If, as you say, we're doing so well, why is GDP growth slowing? If we're doing so well, why will more people be out of work? Why will we be building fewer homes? Why will we hit $500 billion in debt when you campaigned on a fiscal and moral imperative to reduce it? Speaker, we are actually poorer than we think. When I got to Queen's Park this morning to prepare and read the fall economic statement, I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to see tax relief measures for middle-income earners. They promised it in 2018. I wanted to see tax cuts for small businesses, funding for colleges and universities. I wanted to see a program that would train those youth so they can get jobs, that would help small businesses and Ontario businesses who are suffering under tariffs, put those people, those young people to work in those companies. That's what I wanted to see, Speaker. I wanted to see money for hospitals who are facing a $1 billion deficit. And what did we see to address those issues, Speaker? Nothing. Why? It's either because they don't want to or they can't. So why don't they want to do this, Speaker? Why don't they want to fix all these issues? It's because they would rather dole out money to their insider friends through the Skills Development Fund. They'd rather spend hundreds of millions of dollars on moving the Ontario Science Centre to Ontario Place and building a parking lot. They'd rather bury our money in an underground tunnel under the 401 than fix the programs that make Ontario great. So, Speaker, let's come back to the numbers. Of the $2 billion increase in programs, $1.5 billion is for contingency, only $600 million for programs, Speaker. None of that to education, colleges, universities, or hospitals. Why, Speaker? Because it is not their priority. It's their priority to help their friends and get our money tied up in programs and projects that help their insider friends get rich off taxpayers. Speaker, this is a fall economic statement that could have met the moment. I'm sorry to say it did not, and it's a sad day for the people of Ontario.
I recognize the member for Guelph.
Speaker, the fall economic statement fails to protect everyday Ontarians. People are losing their jobs. The cost of living is skyrocketing. Housing costs are still sky high, and the Premier is talking about a ridiculous tunnel that will be a costly nightmare and will do nothing to fix gridlock. There is no plan for families lining up at food banks because rents are sky high. No plan for 80,000 people experiencing homelessness because there is no affordable housing. No plan for young people who can't get ahead in the face of high unemployment and skyrocketing housing costs. Housing starts are down this year after last year's historic lows, and the Premier continues to say no to legalizing mid-rises and multiplexes, no to protecting renters, no to building deeply affordable homes. Speaker, people can't afford to live in Ontario. The feds will make it worse, and our kids will ask this government while they're cancelling the obligation to have a climate plan for future generations.
Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Speaker, a plan to protect Ontario, a concept I can support, but we all know a lot can look good on paper, but the devil is always in the details. From the macro of the province to, shall I say, the micro of our ridings, I hope this plan protects all steel workers in this province, including those at the Nanticoke Industrial Park who feel betrayed by this government. $400 million through the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, good news, but I see it includes bridges. And we all know, I've asked until I'm blue in the face here, when Caledonia will see the replacement of the Argyle Street Bridge at risk of becoming a national headline. And I'm curious to see how the $1.1 billion is spent in home care. Sadly, no mention of fighting illegal tobacco ruining our small towns, perhaps in the budget. Sadly, no mention of agriculture this afternoon. I maintain the best way to Tariff-Proof Ontario is to increase processing capacity for our ag sector. Keeping processing local for, say, beef and pork reduces immediate tariff exposure and gives Ontario more bargaining room and domestic market resilience. Again, Speaker, hopefully in the budget. I look forward to getting into the details of this bill. Thank you, Speaker.
Statements by the ministry. Motions. Petitions. I recognize the member for Nickel.
Thank you, Speaker. And I would like to present this petition called Ontario Needs Doctor, Not Discriminatory Rules. Should we wait for 30 seconds for everybody to exit, Speaker, or do I keep on going?
Would you like to keep going, or should we just wait for 30 seconds? Would you just quietly exit and keep the comments down? Thank you. I recognize the member for Nickel Belt. You can start the
Speaker, and I'm happy to present those petitions called Ontario Needs Doctor, Not Discriminatory Rules. Basically, a lot of people from all over Ontario, we're over at 1,000 signatures, find that the new requirement for applicants to have 2 years of high school in Ontario to be unfair, discriminatory, especially for international medical graduate. IMG, International Medical Graduate, have already invested their time, their resources, including licensing exam, credential verification, and now, halfway through the process, they're not allowed to get selected on first choice. Introducing this change midway through the application cycle undermine transparency, fairness, and confidence in the selection process. The more selection we have, the more chances that we get the best physicians to come. So they petitioned the Legislative Assembly Ontario to reverse the new Ontario high school attendance requirement for the upcoming selection. I fully support this petition. Will affix my name to it and ask Rafi to bring it to the clerk.
petitions. I recognize the member for London West.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I am proud to present a petition today that calls on the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to properly fund our schools and to support our children. The petition notes the cuts to per-student funding that have been implemented by the Ford government since they took office, amounting to $6.35 billion removed from the public education system, and there are consequences to that loss of funding. We see bigger class sizes. We see students who don't have access to an EA. We see special education supports being cut. We see children who are still struggling with the aftermath of the pandemic. And as our kids are experiencing increasing mental health crises, we see the government spending only 22 cents per day per child on mental health supports. And there is, we know from teachers, there's a rising crisis of violence in schools. So the petition calls on the Ford government to properly fund education. Don't try to pretend that Bill 33, by allowing the government to take over school boards, is going to fix the problem. We need to fund education and support our kids. I'm proud to support this petition, affix my signature, and we'll send it to the table with Paige Aditya.
Member for Essex.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank John Duffy for sending this petition in. And this is a petition to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, and it talks about the cost to the economy of various trade barriers that are set up by various provincial governments across the country. And these barriers tend to increase the cost of goods, and they also tend to increase the cost of services. And what this petition does is it calls upon the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to take a look at this issue and to institute a policy whereby we have what I will describe as free trade within Canada between the Canadian provinces. That's something that I can certainly support, I think it's good for workers in Canada. I think it's good for workers across the country. I think it's good for businesses in Ontario, and I think it's good for businesses across the country too. So I will certainly support this petition. I will sign my name on it, and I'm going to give it to this responsible page, Lila, who will bring it to the clerk's table. Thank you.
The member for Waterloo.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This petition deals with social media use among young Ontarians. I tabled a motion back in the spring asking the government to work together with us to address the overuse of screen time and social media. Many people would be surprised, I think, in this legislature to learn that our youth are spending 4.8 hours a day on screens. The research, the growing body of research tells a story of how this is impacting both mental health, educational outcomes, physical health. So in the spirit of collaboration that the Finance Minister was just talking about, this motion is sitting at social policy. It is waiting to be called. We are waiting to do the work. I think we should do the work together. But at the end of the day, we do need to review the addictive nature of social media platforms. We do need to clarify the responsibilities of social media companies regarding the moderation, the use of social media. And I think public health has to start warning parents, Madam Speaker, of the negative impacts of overly using screens and social media. Remember, these algorithms are designed to be addictive. That's our job. Our job is to protect children and students in Ontario. Let's get to work. Let's work together. I mean, there's even some parents in here whose children are on social media a lot. Maybe they should know what's actually going on behind closed doors. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member for Mississauga-Malton.
Thank you, Speaker. First of all, I want to say thank you to the member from Essex, and through him, I was able to get to this petition from Mary, and thank you, Mary, for bringing something which is very important for the people of Ontario. Speaker, this petition is talking about if there's going to be a storm, there's going to be an impact, and we are talking about the storm of tariff, and with the fall economic statement coming out today, and we can see the people who put this petition together knew there is going to be a storm and there will be impact of that storm, which is tariff, and that is what we are seeing in the fall economic statement as well. And the wonderful people of Ontario is asking this government to come together, work together, and break the barrier between all the provinces. And that's something which we heard from the minister about being a nation builder, breaking those barriers, becoming Canada as the #1 customer for Canada. And so I want to say thank you to the members who have signed this petition, looking forward petition, which this government is already implementing. And I absolutely support this petition, Madam Speaker, and I'm signing and going to give it to the page Ava. Thank you.
The member for Sudbury.
Speaker, I want to thank Kathy Orlando from Sudbury for collecting signatures on this petition. It's called Scrap Bill 5, Do Development Right. I also want to recognize that former Chief Muniz is up in the gallery. Basically what they talk about is with Bill 5, how it's going to create special economic zones, suspend law and labor laws, environmental protections, public health rules, even legal liability. First Nation leadership, as we saw during these committee meetings that we had, they've been clear that Bill 5 violates the duty to consult. It ignores the requirement of free, prior, and informed consent. It also disrespects treaty rights and threatens critical land and water by gutting protections for archaeological sites and endangered species in the province. The reality is Bill 5, instead of speeding up projects, is more than likely going to slow down projects because of protests that are sure to rise from this. Also, it's going to slow down progress because of the legal conflicts that are going to happen. So what they're asking for is that the bill be repealed. They start over with full consultation, including with First Nations, so they can do development right in Ontario. I support this petition. This is actually what the Ontario Mining Association advocates for. That's the proper way to develop mines in the future. I'll fix my signature, provide it to Paige Naomi for the table.
I recognize the member for Nickel Belt.
Thank you, Speaker. And I would like to thank Pauline Villeneuve from Hanmer in my riding for these petitions. They're called double social assistance rate. Basically, we have over 900,000 Ontarians who are forced to rely on social assistance right now. The Ford government promised a raise to Ontario Disability Support Program, but that raise was only 5% and provided no additional support to those who receive Ontario work, whereas inflation is at a 40-year high, and people on fixed income are forced to make sacrifices every day just to survive, whereas both ODSP and OW recipients live in legislated poverty with a meager $58 increase to their ODSP and no additional support for OW recipient. They petitioned the Legislative Assembly to immediately double the social assistance rate so that people can live dignified, healthy lives. I support this petition, will affix my name to it, and ask Ollie to bring it to the clerk.
Thank you. Further petitions, I recognize the member for Sudbury.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I also have a petition entitled a petition to raise social assistance rates. As my colleague from Nickel Belt just said, Ontario Works is only at $733 for individuals, and ODSP is at $1368. That is far below what any rent locally would cost you. There has been open letters sent to the Premier and 2 cabinet ministers, was signed by 230 organizations. They are recommending that the rates for OW and ODSP be doubled. And in fact, we've been reading these petitions for so long that maybe it has to be even higher than that. We just listened to the fall economic statement, Speaker. I don't think I heard anything about caring for the most vulnerable people who make the least amount of money, who could rely on the service. The reality is, in this petition, they talk about how the people who are on ODSP, even though they got a meager 5% increase, are still far below the poverty line. People living in disabilities are forced by the government to live below the poverty line. And obviously those with OW who are even lower than that are struggling to survive and probably likely are the reason we're seeing growing encampments in all of our communities. If you remember back when CRB was put in place, the basic income was $2,000 a month. That was a standard that was chosen at a time that people would need to survive. As you can see, both of these $733 is far below $2,000, and $1368 for ODSP is also far below $2,000. The people who have signed this petition, which I support, are petitioning the Assembly to double social assistance rates for both OW and ODSP. I obviously support this petition. I'll fix my signature. Provide to Paige Rafi for the table.
Thank you. Further petitions, I recognize the member for Nickel Belt.
Thank you, Speaker. And I would like to thank Jeannette Rainville from Cape-Breton in my riding for these petitions. They're called Improve Access to Primary Care. You all know, Speaker, that Medicare is a program that defines us as Ontarian, as Canadian. We get the care we need based on our needs, not on our ability to pay. But right now, close to 2.5 million Ontarians do not have access to primary care. They don't have a family doctor. They don't have a nurse practitioner. 40,000 of them are in my riding in Nickel Belt. We all know that the best quality care is delivered by interdisciplinary care. So we have Community Health Centre, Aboriginal Health Access Centre, Nurse Practitioner-led Clinic, community-governed family health teams. They all have long wait lists. They all are willing to take on more people, more patients, but they haven't had a base budget increase in about, well, since this government has been in power, and they haven't been funded to hire more staff, more nurse practitioners, more physicians, more nurses for years. This has to change. The nurse practitioners were at Queen's Park today asking just that. Pay them what they are worth and fund more positions for nurse practitioners through all of the interdisciplinary teams. I fully support this petition. I will affix, and they asked the Legislative Assembly to immediately increase funding for Community Health Centre, Aboriginal Health Access Centre, family health teams, nurse practitioner-led clinic, Indigenous primary health care organization. I fully support this petition, will affix my name to it, and ask Mansahaj to bring it to the clerk.
Thank you. Further petitions, I recognize the member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, the member for Nickel Belt, for creating this petition, which was signed by, among other people, Janice Martel, which my colleagues here may remember, was the person who brought forward the idea for an apology for the McIntyre miners that we had passed unanimously here. This petition is entitled Health Care Not for Sale. Basically, they talk about the importance of people in Ontario getting health care based on their need, not on their ability to pay. That's what separates Canadians from the American model. Unfortunately, the Conservative government has been actively privatizing our healthcare system, increasing it rapidly. We heard in the fall economic statement recently that there's going to be even more money given to long-term care. I think the people in Ontario don't see long-term care as an effective way of getting money to the front line, but we do see the private long-term care industry making more and more money while the people who live there aren't typically taken care of very properly. We know that privatization will bleed nurses and doctors and other healthcare professionals, including our nurse practitioners and PSWs. The reality is that we need to invest in our hospitals and not invest into shareholders' profits at the end of the day. And no matter how many times we hear you're going to pay with your credit card and not, or your OHIP card, not your credit card, we hear countless stories, including filling the gallery with people who have had to pay with their credit card for health care. The people who have signed the petition are calling on the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to immediately stop the privatization of Ontario's healthcare system and fix that crisis in healthcare by presenting a serious plan to help recruit, retain, and return respected healthcare professionals, as well as other things that I won't go into because I see we're out of time for petitions, Speaker. Thank you. I support this petition. I'll fix my signature, give it to Naomi for the table.
Thank you. The time for petitions has expired. Orders of the day. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Good afternoon, Speaker. Order G40.
They can't call it. It's,
Order number 8.
Recognize the Government House Leader.
Government Order number 8.
Government Order number 8, resuming the debate adjourned earlier today on the amendment to the motion regarding report writing proceedings of the Standing Committee on Justice Policy on the study on intimate partner violence.
Okay, we will resume debate with the member from Kiewit.
Miigwech, Speaker, thank you. This morning, I'm just going to continue the discussion with regards to the motion tabled by the government, a motion regarding the Standing Committee on Justice Policy's report on intimate partner violence. I know I talked about earlier this morning, I spoke about the Moose Hide campaign, and I thank them for the work that they do, not just in Ontario, but across the country. But, Speaker, I know that, I want to turn over to the motion we are speaking about today, to declare intimate partner violence as endemic. At the same time, we know that many survivors of IPV and organizations have called on Ontario, to declare IPV as an epidemic. In fact, Speaker, I know that over 100 municipalities, 150 organizations, and of course, multiple police organizations, associations, I should say, have already declared IPV as an epidemic, and they do call on the government to do that as well. And I think there is a key difference between, English is my second language, and when I think about endemic versus epidemic, Endemic in this case means that intimate partner violence is present or prevalent. An epidemic would require that the government to apply resources of its eradication by treating it as an emergency. So that there's a big difference. If this government is willing to recognize that there is an issue, then why don't they treat it with the level of urgency that it requires to be eradicated? I know that when we talk about violence, when we talk about violence against women in Canada, described as a deliberate race, identity, gender-based genocide by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Since the inquiry took place, the proportion of femicide victims who are Indigenous have substantially increased, going from 5.4% in 2019 to 2020 to 8.1% in 2022-23. Speaker, I know despite Indigenous women and girls making up 5% of the female population, they make up 20% of all women and girls killed in gender-related homicides in Canada. I know that these stats and real-life risks become even more extreme for Indigenous women who identify as LGBTQ+ and Indigenous women with disabilities. Speaker, over 10 years ago, the rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada were described as an epidemic by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples. Indigenous women in Ontario are 3 times more likely to be murdered than non-Indigenous women. 3 times more likely just because of being an Indigenous woman. Some of this information I've just shared was included in the statement released last fall by the Ontario Indigenous Women's Advisory Council. This council was announced by the Ontario government in 2020. That includes representatives from the Ontario Native Women's Association, the Chiefs of Ontario, the Anishinaabe Nation, and Antsnabeg Nation. Speaker, 1 year ago this month, the Advisory Council declared intimate partner violence in Ontario an epidemic. Their statement at the following time included recommendations, including the following, quote, Indigenous women's safety be prioritized at all levels of government, in all policies, plans, and strategies that impact or have a potential to impact the lives of Indigenous women. Another quote, Indigenous women be involved in the development of all legislative, policy, program, and service responses to the issues that impact them, including gender-based violence. Another quote, additional and separate investments for Indigenous men and boys to support healing and restoration of balance in communities. And here's another quote, that the recommendations from their statement. Increased and sustainable investments from all levels of government into new and existing community-based, culturally grounded programs and services that improve Indigenous women's safety and promote family and community healing, including funding for violence prevention, education, and awareness, culturally relevant shelter services, transitional housing, and affordable housing, community-based child welfare prevention, Indigenous-specific mental health, addictions, and wellness programs, and programs that support Indigenous women's leadership. End quote. Speaker, we do not see these recommendations reflected in the discussions here today. And I say that because, you know, earlier this morning, as a member of Kiwetnung, as a member of the First Nations people, you know, I am here to represent the unrepresented. And I am here to represent the underrepresented. And this shows today where you do not see these recommendations at all in the dialogue that we are having today. Speaker, I know that we know that intimate partner violence does not discriminate. I know that up in Northern Ontario, I know up in Kiwetnung, we know that intimate partner violence is an issue. It is something that we face in the North. In 2020, the municipality of Red Lake and the township of Ear Falls collected feedback from the public and stakeholders on a community safety and well-being plan. Part of their focus was on emotional and sexual violence. And I want to share some of their findings. OPP data, Ontario Provincial Police, data from the municipality of Red Lake annual report showed that there were 16 sexual assaults and 89 assaults in 2019. While the report did not, report specifically on domestic or intimate partner violence, we know that intimate partner violence represents nearly a third of all police reported violent crimes in Canada, and 75% of the victims identify as female. The report also identified some of the gaps, some of the barriers that are faced related to emotional and sexual violence, some of which were youth who are dealing with emotional or sexual violence need mental health supports to cope and move forward. But there are wait lists to access the care that they need, and no crisis response services between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. There is not enough focus on warm referrals between crisis response and aftercare supports. There is a need to increase the community awareness of the issue and the supports. There is a need for counseling at the shelter. There is also a lack of support for men who face domestic violence and want to live with their children. The report also noted some key opportunities that would help to fill these gaps, which I urge this government to help make it a reality. To provide 24/7 crisis response services in Red Lake and Near Falls. To establish a 24/7 youth hub, safe space, and to take measures to increase awareness and coordination so that at-risk individuals can be connected to the right agencies proactively. I know I'm running out of time here, but you know, again, as a part of being an MPP for the Kiwetinoong, I honor and represent 31 First Nations, 24 of those that are fly-in. And I just want to say that, you know, declaring an IPV as an epidemic is absolute much need that as much needed. Miigwech.
Further debate? I recognize the member for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today to speak on Motion 8, the intimate partner violence, brought forward by my colleague, the Associate Minister responsible for Women's Social and Economic Opportunity, Minister Williams, and of course the great work done on the Intimate Partner Violence Committee work by my colleague from Kitchener South Hespeler, Jess Dixon. We've had this discussion for many years since I've been in the legislature, and it's going to continue on, and we're going to continue to debate supports in our attempt to end violence against women, intimate partner violence, what we're talking today, because every day in Ontario there are women, children and families living in fear of someone they know, someone they once trusted. And it is a heartbreaking reality, and we've all been with members of our community hearing these heart-wrenching stories. And we can no longer view them as isolated incidents. Intimate partner violence is not new, it's not sudden, and it's not temporary. It's endemic, deeply rooted, persistent, and present in every community across our province. Today, our government stands united in formally recognizing that reality, because when we speak the truth about the scope of the problem, we take the first step towards ending it. And as a government, and as has been said by many of the colleagues, especially the two that I've mentioned, the words we choose matter. And this definition is deliberate, it's thoughtful, and it's grounded in evidence. We know that the language alone does not protect people, but language shapes the understanding, and understanding drives action. The word endemic is not used lightly. It does not appear overnight, and it will not disappear on its own. It's rooted in attitudes inequities, and histories that have been passed from generation to generation. By calling it endemic, we are acknowledging that this is not a temporary crisis, but an ongoing challenge that demands a long-term response. This definition aligns Ontario with the World Health Organization, leading academics, and members from across this legislature who have recognized the same truth. In doing so, we're sending a clear message. Violence has no place in Ontario, not in our homes, not in our workplace, not anywhere. Our government has made it clear we have zero tolerance for violence against women. That principle guides every law we pass and every dollar we invest. Because every woman, every person deserves to live in safety and dignity, free from intimidation and the threat of violence. We also recognize and celebrate the frontline workers, community leaders, advocates, and survivors who dedicate their lives to ending this cycle. Their courage, their compassion, and their persistence are the foundation of this work. We owe them not only our gratitude, but our partnership and our continued support. Madam Speaker, you've been in the House a length of time as I have been. We have shared many names of people that we have spoken to over the years, where it's Victim Services in Durham, Victim Services in Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Victim Services Toronto with Carly Kalish, who still informs us weekly. I have a call with her to see what next steps we can take, because we are going to have to take further steps, and we all know it, and it's heart-wrenching. But we are part of the solution by being elected members and having this podium and taking actions. And I know we debate which actions, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. But at the end of the day, the goal is always about ending the violence against women and people in this province. So our government's commitment is not just spoken, it is demonstrated through action. And we've taken concrete steps to strengthen protection for women, expand prevention efforts, and support survivors. We passed new laws, some of them the first of their kind in Canada, to make it harder to victimize women and easier for survivors to access justice. Now I'm going to mention a few pieces of legislation that we have worked on. And when I said first in Canada, I want to give a shout out to the Minister of Education at the time, Minister Lecce, who passed the Ontario Acts to protect students from sex trafficking. $2.4 million investment to mandate all boards to implement anti-trafficking plan, the first of its kind in Canada. Training the people that educate our children, giving them the resources. And again, it's education, but it is education for all of us, for the parents, for the students, protecting our children. This is generational, trying to end violence. And many of you know that I have had many pieces of legislation to combat human sex trafficking, so I'm quite proud of the work that we have done, multi-ministry work that we have done since we've been in government. And I know that Minister Thompson, who was Minister of Education before, had certainly started that work. Some of my new colleagues in the legislature, the now Minister of Colleges and University, MPP from Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry, was his Bill 123, Aaron's Law, that amends the Education Act to require school boards to implement programs for child sexual abuse prevention and reporting. And it mandates the school boards must establish policies to actually engage students in age-appropriate discussions on the topics, provide information to parents and guardians, offer training to teachers and staff. So it's preventing, it's allowing a comfort area where children that might have been abused can report safely in our schools. Another piece that has been brought forward by our great members. The member from Thornhill and I did an act to amend the Name Change Act in 2023 so that convicted sex offenders under Christopher's Law, we stop them from legally changing their names in Ontario. They could hide their identities. They could be in jail and change their names before they get out. And unassuming communities are suspect to victimization by repeated offenders. I know that the Solicitor General has worked very hard with those members to get us this far in the Safe Streets Act, I believe it was. I have lots of pieces of paper that makes changes to education. The Solicitor General, I just have to look for this piece of paper because I had it also nicely put out. The Solicitor General at the time, Minister Sylvia Jones, brought in legislation for further protections and access to justice. The Ministry of Tourism, so that hotels and motels would more freely give their guest registry if there was something the police needed, that there's untoward action that was going on at those hotels. And I know Minister Lisa MacLeod at the time worked passionately on many angles of violence against women and the human trafficking that we have raised awareness about, has been prevalent, and have brought in much action to combat that. Trying to just remember, Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Health, of course, has been involved. The present Minister of Health, who was the Solicitor General at the time, brought in legislation for further protections and awareness. And we continue as MPPs to educate in our communities. And I know that the member from Kitchener South Hespeler was an advocate with the Minister of Education, Minister Lecce, in coaching boys to men, which is through the Interval House out of Hamilton. But working with the Ministry of Education, that program has now spread across all of Ontario. And I know that the member that just spoke before me said about education for men and boys. We absolutely need to do that. And there's good examples in our communities, and we need to push those further ahead. So I know I'm speaking a lot of past examples, and I'm not naming them all, but I just want to say I'm very proud of our government collectively, who has multi-ministries worked together to combat anti-human trafficking, violence, get more access to justice in our systems. I want to comment on the Associate Minister, with her launch of Ontario Stands, which is a province's action plan to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. Through Ontario Stands, they're investing $1.4 billion to address and prevent gender-based violence. And this is one of the largest commitments of its kind in Ontario's history. And it's long-term commitment. And it is working with the final report for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Through there, she's launched Pathways to Safety. And there's unique challenges faced by Indigenous women and girls, as was mentioned by my colleague, MPP Solomon Makwa. She's established an Indigenous Women's Advisory Council that guides the approach. I myself have worked with many Indigenous communities through the years to fight violence against women, and the uniqueness is there, and I'm so proud of their incredible leadership of the women in the Indigenous communities. It is really amazing, and I know it's going forward even farther. But it's the funding that supports frontline agencies, shelters, counseling services, prevention programs. All this makes a real difference in people's lives. And every dollar is an investment in safety, prevention, and accountability. And Madam Speaker, we know that the government cannot end this problem alone. The solutions must come from the ground up, from communities who know the needs, risks, and realities best. That's why we launched, again under the Associate Minister, the $100 million call for proposals to expand community-based programs. And I know the response was overwhelming, and I know that Women's Resources in Lindsay, Ontario, it serves Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton, the Haliburton YWCA, or sorry, Peterborough YWCA that goes and supports my Halliburton area, the Durham region, all were part of these initiatives and fundings and growing and talking to each other and what else can we do. So that tells us that communities are ready, willing and determined to lead this fight. Our government has worked with the federal partners to secure $162 million to support Ontario's role in the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. And that funding helps align our provincial initiatives with the national priorities and ensures consistency of support across the country. And through Budget 2024 was added $310 million over 3 years to help community organizations manage rising costs. We know inflation, staffing pressures. It's not immune to those community groups that supply such vital services and that survivors rely on their support. In addition, the government has invested $13.5 million over 3 years to enhance programs for women, children, youth, and others at high risk of violence or exploitation. These investments are producing results. More survivors are finding safe shelter, more communities are offering prevention programs, more organizations are delivering trauma-informed care, and every one of these efforts, every program, every initiative brings us closer to a safer Ontario. Madam Speaker, when we talk about zero tolerance, it's not just a slogan. It must be reflected in the laws we pass, the budgets we set, and the partnerships we build, and we're doing that. We are taking a responsible, evidence-based approach to describe this issue as it truly is. An epidemic appears suddenly and spreads rapidly, but intimate partner violence has been with us for generations. We recognize its depth, its persistence, the systemic changes needed to end it. This language respects the lived experience of survivors and the research of experts. Name it accurately is not just semantics. It defines how we respond. It guides how we allocate resources, and it shapes how society understands the problem. Ending violence against women requires cooperation across political parties, governments, and communities. And I want to recognize the members that I've worked with in the past, not only the person in the chair at the moment, but members across the aisle that are still there. And truly, we worked on many issues together about violence, and it's not a part of it's an issue. It's our shared and simple goal. I know that just most recently, the $26.7 million that was announced by our Associate Minister Williams, and also I want to give a big shout out to the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, Minister Parsa, because we hear from the shelter spaces. They need some more supports. There is more education out there. Many of the things I've mentioned in the past, we are educating people, whether it's through in the school system, it's in our communities, it's in our church groups, it's in our probus clubs, it's in our legions. People are aware. It's not a pretty part of society, but we have to face it, and how do we deal with it? And we need those community partners. But a place called Home Women's Resources in my Kawartha Lakes area, they're happy about the increase, not only for shelter spaces, but the Family Court and Support Worker Program that helps victims. As we all know, it is incredibly difficult to come forward, to find ways to escape a terrible, terrible situation. And Minister Williams has spoke eloquently about supporting women financially, economic opportunities, skilled trades and development, so they may even still be in this horrible situation, but they're able to find a financial path out, economic independence, and move on with their lives. All these many programs are so important, and they're so impactful, and they are working. And those are the type of proof, that's the type of proof that we need. I know that the previous ministers of Children, Community and Social Services have been wonderful to deal with, to recognize, to work with other ministries. I want to thank the the House leaders and MPP Steve Clark for his many years of support when I've been here, and all my male colleagues who support. Maybe it's mainly driven by the women that you see standing up, but it's supported by the men behind us in our legislature. And as I said, I'm very proud of the advances that we have made. I want to say that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, especially through the pandemic, the assistance that was given, funneled maybe through the municipalities as they're the social service providers. A place called Home in Lindsay received over $1 million, was able to add on to their existing shelter beds. They've continued to get programs that give them the tools to even just cameras to watch, not only in the washrooms, because of course, this horrible problem we have with drugs in our communities, but to give them modern tools to deal with the situations that present before them. They have midterm housing to help people move on. And I'm very proud of my municipalities for the work they've done with provincial governments, predominantly, some of the federal governments, but we're all on the same forward-thinking path of how do we deal with what's in front of us, let's be realistic, and what are the pathways. So I know that Associate Minister Williams has certainly, we've been lucky to have her in our caucus because she's worked with these vulnerable individuals for decades before you got here, and so thank you for your leadership and your background that you've brought to this file, so I really appreciate that. So, Madam Speaker, as I close today, we have to go and forefront in our mind with violence will never be tolerated in Ontario. We need to protect survivors, and we need to continue working with every partner, every community to end it. And our government will do whatever it takes because the right to live free from violence is not negotiable. Recognizing intimate partner violence as an endemic is an act of honesty and accountability, and it tells survivors we see them, it tells offenders that we will hold them to account, and it tells every Ontarian that we are united in building a province where safety, dignity, and equality are not ideals, they are realities. So, Speaker, together we can and we will end violence against women in Ontario. Every woman deserves to be safe, every family deserves peace, and every community deserves a chance to thrive free from fear. Madam Speaker, it's time that we continued this pathway and this motion and move forward. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Further debate? I recognize the member for Waterloo.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What a strange debate we are having here in this House today. About a year and a half ago, in response to the call to declare intimate partner violence an epidemic, the government struck a committee. That committee sat down. They did some work. That committee stopped doing the work. One member of that committee wrote a report bypassing legislative research and procedural affairs here. And before the House today, we have a motion asking for us to look at that report. To say that these are strange days would be a grave understatement. Of course, things have really, well, actually, as the Premier says, the cheese has truly slipped off the cracker around here. And I want to talk, of course, about the issue of intimate partner violence that is happening in the province of Ontario, because contrary to what you have heard, the stats tell a very different story than the messaging that is coming out of the government. And I would say also to the members of this House that actions speak louder than even symbolic words that we've heard in this House on this very issue. And I will say I had the opportunity yesterday to question the Attorney General for the province of Ontario at Estimates. Now, for those of you who don't know, at Estimates, we're called to ask about the fiscal decisions that the ministries are making. In fact, the chair of the Justice Committee said, we are here to determine if the ministry, the Attorney General, is making wise and effective decisions as it pertains to the resource allocation to deal with court backlogs, procedural policing, you name it. Right? And of course, you'll know that I'm very, very concerned about what's happening in our court systems. If you go down Bay Street right now and you walk into the court there, it will not be a packed courthouse, despite the backlogs. What we heard yesterday from the Ontario trial lawyers is that those courtrooms are often closed. And you know how you deal with intimate partner violence and how you build some confidence in a system that's supposed to deal with people who feel that it is okay or acceptable to strike their partner, primarily women, is that you hold them to account with a strong justice system. And when that justice system fails those women, and ultimately also fails the accused, then you have a compromised system in Ontario. And that is when violence thrives. And I'll give you some context for this discussion, because I certainly did not get any answers from the Attorney General yesterday. But the numbers on the cases that are currently being thrown out, the sexual assault cases in Ontario that are being thrown out of court, where justice is not happening. In 2022, it was 1,326. In 2023, 1,171. In 2024, 1,439 cases were dispensed. And here we are in 2025 with an all-time high number of sexual assault cases that went to court but then got dispensed, is now 1,530 cases. So just try to imagine, just for a second, how hard it is for a woman who has experienced heinous violence. I'm going to be reading some quotes about this, but I just want to make sure that people understand that when we're talking about sexual violence, Madam Speaker, this is one of the most heinous crimes because it is about power. It is about holding power over another person, and it is about stealing their humanity. And that is why it is so vile, Madam Speaker. And the systems for many, many years have been designed by men. But women, for years now, have raised their voices around how hard it is to access justice once you have experienced a violent crime like sexual assault. And of course, I did try to deal with this system back in 2023, Madam Speaker. And I brought forward Lydia's Law to this legislature. And for those of you who don't know, an MPP has the right and the privilege to bring forward a piece of legislation once a year to address an issue that we feel is very close to us. Often these issues come from the heart, but also come from a constituent. And in this case, for me, it came from Lydia. So this is almost 3 years ago, I received a desperate call from Lydia's mom, and she was reaching out to help her daughter, who had been sexually assaulted. And she had been embroiled in a 2-year court proceedings. Lydia was a child at the time. She described the experience of her daughter as re-traumatizing and cruel. I would say that we've obviously connected as mothers. Sorry. And she asked if we could work together, right? These are the best kind of private members' bills when they're inspired by people, right? And also with the hope of actually changing the system, I would say, right? Because some private members' bills come through this House and they're very symbolic and they're very surface, but not this one. She asked me, you know, can we try to fix the system so that other daughters don't have to go through this court system like mine did? And to be honest, at that time, I will tell you, I didn't actually know how broken the court system was at that moment. But this is what she said. She says, my daughter was sexually assaulted. One of the bravest things she ever did was come forward and file a police report. Police will tell you it's so hard for women to come into a station and disclose this. She had to sit down, she made a video statement, she went through the entire ordeal in detail, hour after hour. And she went to say, she said when the investigation was completed and it was communicated to us that the charges had been laid, there was a small sense of relief because few people know this, but it's very difficult to lay charges around sexual assaults. The body of evidence has to be there. The body of evidence has to be proven, and the police officers, who are very, very special officers who work in these cases, they know that they have to gather a body of evidence that will be tested in the court and tested by a lawyer, and it's a huge risk, mentally, physically, for that person. As she says, the most difficult thing a parent can ever experience is watching your child suffer. Throughout the over 2 years of the courts, my daughter's mental health suffered immensely. From the first day of court until the final day of sentencing, we were faced with constant setbacks and miscommunications from the court system and constant delays due to court backlogs. And with every delay, there was a setback for Lydia. So this is a young woman who showed great courage, who was re-traumatized by the justice system that was supposed to support her. And I have to say, so this was the inspiration and the motivation for Lydia's Law. So we looked for some solutions. It turns out that the Auditor General for the Province of Ontario back in 2019 made some key recommendations to address the lack of transparency and corresponding backlog in the court system. These recommendations were embedded in Lydia's Law. So this is a piece of legislation that is grounded in the Auditor General's recommendations. And what it would have done is it would have compelled the Attorney General to prepare a public progress report detailing criminal cases pending disposition and analyze the reasons for delays, complete with data that included breakdown for reasons of withdrawal. So we want to know why these cases are getting thrown out. We want to know why, you know, a young woman or a woman goes through the court system and then gets the lawyer, passes the test to actually have the case be heard in an Ontario law, a courtroom, and then for some reason gets stayed, gets thrown out. We want to know why that's happening. Why did this happen in 2025 thus far with 1,530 cases? Don't you want to know why? I want to know why. I know my colleague over there, she wants to know why too. But you know, in order to make that happen, you actually have to do the work. The Attorney General has to do his work, right? And so yesterday in estimates, I asked him, I said, how much have you allocated to expose and review and address all of these court cases that are not seeing justice? Do you think that the Attorney General for the Province of Ontario could give me a number? No. At one point I said, are you even capable of saying a number with some zeros behind it? Nothing, Madam Speaker. Privileged. This is not privileged information. This is, as a reminder, this is not a business here. This is the government. We are in charge of the people's money. Transparency is key as a key cornerstone of a democracy. The Attorney General for the Province of Ontario should be able to tell me as the legislator from Waterloo how much he has allocated through his ministry to ensure that women who come forward and bring forward a sexual assault case have the courage to do that, why they are not getting justice in the Province of Ontario. So you can write all the damn reports you want about intimate partner violence. If the justice system is not anchoring that report or those recommendations, then intimate partner violence will continue to rise. This is the premise. This is the premise of our very work here. And then I want to say, what happened was After much consultation with activists and advocacy groups from all across the province of Ontario, my private members' day, my bill came up. Lydia was not able to speak to it at that time because she had a publication ban on her case, which is another huge issue for women who want to raise their voices when they're facing sexual assault. But she finally got that publication ban lifted, and she will bring her voice here to Queen's Park, because what happened on my private members' bill day is that the government dispensed the bill without debate and sent it to committee to die. You know what happens when you signal to the women of the province of Ontario that you do not want to have a serious conversation about strengthening the court system for women who have enough courage to come forward? You're basically telling them that you do not really care about intimate partner violence, that you do not think that it's an epidemic, and that you don't think that justice is owed to them. That's what happened on that day. And putting aside, all the work, a whole year's worth of work that went into the bill, putting aside all of the the research and legislative research and legal counsel, and we designed a good bill. We designed a good bill that would address what's happening in our court system, that women are being denied justice. But when the government dispensed it to the Justice Committee to let it die, you sent another message to the people of this province that I'm sure is not going to be contained in this report, right? Now, what's the use of a report if you're going to turn your back on women who are trying to seek justice when they have been violated, right? This is why people do not have confidence in politicians. This is why they lose trust in this institution as a whole, is when you turn your back on women. And so, to listen to some of the government members talk about everything that you're doing when you have fundamentally turned your back on them, because at the end of the day, without a strong justice system, without a well-resourced police service, because the police are just as frustrated as we are about this situation, I have to say, it defies logic on so many levels. I think that it's amoral to do so. But I will tell you is that Lydia now, after a whole year and more legal fees, she has lifted the publication ban on her case. And she said to me, I want to come back to Queen's Park. I'm going to tell them my story. Will you bring forward this bill again? And I said, you're damn right I will. And if you, there you go, good. So I asked the question, honestly, how do we expect young girls and women to have faith in the system, and why would they report knowing how painful the court system is? So there are many things that have to happen to address intimate partner violence. I agree with the education and the curriculum. Of course, this has to happen. I think that there are some good programs out there. I mean, I know our Sexual Assault Centre in Waterloo Region and Women's Crisis Services and the YWCA, all primarily female-dominated areas. They have brought forward programming. They are looking at restorative justice. They work with the Child Witness Centre to support people who, have experienced this kind of violence. But we're never going to truly address it if the court system isn't there to balance out the imbalance in society. And speaking of imbalances, I do want to say, one of the things that we don't talk enough about is the lack of housing, and why. So there are many women who stay in unsafe relationships because they don't have safe housing, right? In Hamilton, a women's crisis center had to turn away 50 women who were looking for shelter. If you turn them away, you're sending them back to the place where they're being violated. You're sending them back to that place of violence. And I heard yesterday, I mean, it was astounding to me, that the Attorney General said he didn't care how much it's going to cost. Well, we have 50 women on a wait list at the Sexual Assault Centre in Waterloo Region. They're waiting over 3 months for counseling and for support. because this is the kind of trauma that you don't, bounce back from. You need specialized care and compassion, and you need to know that those moments of violence that happen to you, they don't define you. So, Madam Speaker, to sum up, I got no justice from the Attorney General of Ontario. I got no answers. I got no numbers. And at the end of the day, when you're looking at addressing a core systemic issue that, as my colleagues from Kiiwetinoong has indicated, is much worse in Indigenous communities, like just a huge violation of human rights on all fronts. And you look at BIPOC community members who their interactions with the justice system are not positive, I would say, not in the least way. Then you look at the victim services organizations, the not-for-profits across this province, who the minister gave a shout out to. Those not-for-profits across the province are struggling. I mean, we are fundraising in Ontario to keep women safe. How the hell is this happening in 2025? So, and to also make a mention is that when women are being violated and experience violence in their home, and the home is supposed to be safe, right? It's supposed to be a safe place. You're also experiencing what children are exposed to as well. And so all of this has a trickle-out effect from the justice system. Right now in Ontario, our justice system is broken. The Attorney General yesterday used a crazy word, I have to say, when he said, there's magic happening in our courtrooms. Magic, okay? I have never heard such nonsense in my entire life in this place. It's like you're intentionally trying to be unserious about an incredibly serious issue. And this motion essentially amounts to game playing as well. Because not only did we not need a 1,000-page report from the member from Kitchener South Hespeler, because the body of evidence already exists. The pathways to more peaceful living arrangements and to justice for women who are facing intimate partner violence, the research, the evidence, the policies, they're just there. And they've been there for a long time. What we need is some political leadership from the Ford government, from his ministers. We need the resources allocated where the Attorney General can actually say a number, a dedicated number to deal with this issue in Ontario. That's what we need. Regardless, though, we're still going to try to make it better for women. We're dedicated to this, and there are dates where we will do some report writing, because another report is going to save another woman's life. Madam Speaker, I'm sorry to be so passionate about it, but it is frustrating to be in 2025 and debating a motion like this today.
Thank you. Further debate. I recognize the member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the member for Waterloo. She is determined and steadfast, and she's a really good listener. So I hope that we can take what she shared today to heart. To me, it's troubling that women don't have access to justice. And every time I go to Take Back the Night or another event, I hear more and more situations where women have put themselves forward. They've made a really challenging decision to share their story and seek justice against their abuser, and have been left further traumatized. I do want to say that I'm grateful to the member for Kitchener South Hespeler for ensuring that this report comes back. I know she worked very hard to try to put these pages together, to take the committee feedback and put it into a package. And so to the member for Kitchener South Hespeler, I appreciate her determination to make sure that this issue doesn't die. But I have to say I'm pretty troubled to be debating this kind of a motion in this way, and I'll explain why. I've had many experiences over my last 2 years in committee And committee has been a bit of a farce, if you ask me. 0 times have I take amendments and I bring them forward from a privacy commission or a child advocate group or experts in the field and have had 0 times have those amendments been adopted. So today you're asking me to vote on something and debate on something that I have not seen. And I know that when it heads to committee, unfortunately, my experience of committee has been disingenuous. People come in, they share their experiences. We saw this with Bill 9, traveled the country, brought people forward, and 0 amendments. So I am hopeful that the government will prove me wrong and that this committee experience will be genuine and that you will listen and hear the amendments that we need from all parties, because I know we all care about this issue. We all want to see an end to intimate partner violence. And I hope in the committee room we can join together and make meaningful progress so this report comes with real action and it's a collaborative work. But while we sit here talking, the issues get worse. I was a school social worker for 11 years, and I keep in touch with my colleagues. And what I see troubles me. We see a rise in the misogynistic content of pornography. Strangling is now a norm. It is a norm in porn. So young men grow up, they are introduced to pornography oftentimes from a friend at a school, often around the age of 12. And they're watching strangulation as something that a woman enjoys. So their first sexual experience, more and more often, comes at the expense of both the perpetrator and the victim, because they think that this is real life. They think that she enjoys to be strangled. They think that this kind of misogynistic, toxic pornography is welcome. And that's not okay. We see that rise, and we have to be honest about the reality of what our kids are doing online every day, because we could talk about books in schools all day long, but we know that this is where the harms are, and there are 0 guardrails in place. 0 guardrails in place for young people. And I worry about my daughter, because she's 5 times more likely, she's in the age category, 5 times more likely to be abused, sexually abused. And you know what I know? Is just in what I know in our province, 4 programs to prevent reoffenses of sexualized behaviors have been shut down. 4. So these are documented programs that help perpetrators, pedophiles, young offenders with sexualized behaviors, preventing them from reoffending, and they are shut down. They lost their funding. Those experts, those social work experts who work in this field and do the great work to stop people from reoffending and making more people victims, those are closed. And I don't have time to talk about the amount of trafficking. I keep in touch with the people from our local child psychiatry, from our police. I have to say that we have to be honest about what's happening along the 401 corridor. Again, these things are luring machines. Girls think that it's their boyfriend who's taking care of them, and think that their boyfriend's taking care of them. They get addicted to toxic drugs. They will have very hard time moving out of this system of trafficking. We are behind the 8 ball. So while we talk, these things get worse. Alcohol is liberalized, making it more likely that people will be abused, because we know alcohol is adding fuel to the fire. We aren't talking about these guardrails we need for our young people, and we're stripping away the protections, the programs that I know about, not to mention the many others that are shutting down to stop recidivism of childhood sexual abuse. And I saw in the Fez today that funding is going down.
Thank you. Further debate. I recognize the member from Bay of Quinte.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honor to be here today to discuss the motion that's on the floor. And today we are formally recognizing the endemic nature of intimate partner violence in Ontario. And I know we've had a lot of discussion about why endemic, why not epidemic. And it comes back to what's in a name. You know, what we call something matters, especially when our words carry power. And so we think about what is the difference, endemic, epidemic, what does it mean in reality? Well, an epidemic, as we just saw with COVID-19, is something that's often very quickly onset, that lasts for a short period of time, and that does necessitate a crisis response, but the assumption is that once we've done dealing with it, it will then end, and that it's come about suddenly. But we know that things that are endemic don't work that way. And I think that if we look inside ourselves and we think about the history of intimate partner violence, we realize that this is something that has always been with us. And the acknowledgement that it is endemic in no way lessens the severity of it, and in no way lessens the need for a serious response to it. But it will be something that will require more structure, that will need to occur over time, and that cannot be snuffed out in an instant, like with a vaccine or with something else. It's something that's going to require all of us to do serious work over a long period of time and to come to the table to address this crisis as it is. You know, when we think about, the history of intimate partner violence and what used to be normalized. I remember watching, old movies at my grandfather's house, some of those early James Bond movies that I used to love to watch when I was a kid. And we look back on those now, movies from 60 years ago, and we realize how often women were being struck in these films, and that was considered normal. I mean, we do, often we do a tribute to the king. There were kings that had their wives killed publicly because they couldn't produce them a son, or because divorce was illegal, or for any other reason. It is embedded in our culture and in our society, and that is not something that is going to leave quickly or leave without everyone coming to the table and doing the work. And I want to start by thanking the Associate Minister for Women's Social and Economic Opportunity, the member from Brampton Centre, as well as my colleague from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock, who spoke so eloquently earlier. I was here the other day for the member of Kitchener South Hespeler's speech about how she, basically demanded to be part of this committee, and said that if this is not going to go anywhere, then I am not the person that you want on this. And we know how tenacious that member is, and that there is no chance that we are going to put her on this file and that this file will end up in a cabinet somewhere collecting dust. This is going to get across the finish line, and I have to say I have tremendous amount of respect and of confidence in that member, and I look forward to getting this motion passed, getting back to committee, and completing that process that we started with those hearings. I'm going to talk about those hearings a little bit later on. I just heard the member from Kitchener Centre, talk about the challenges with this new digital age that we're in, and with the proliferation of sexualized images and videos online. And I was born in 1992. And I'm sorry for how that might make some of the members in the chamber feel. the member from Waterloo, who I forgot to thank for your incredible work, as well as the member from Oshawa as well. I was born in 1992, and so my generation was the first generation that went through that online revolution, where all of a sudden everyone had a cell phone in their hands, when all of a sudden it became normalized to share images of each other with your partner, with your boyfriend, with your girlfriend. And I saw the effects of that when I was going to school. And it wasn't once or twice. It was a constant thing where a female friend of mine would have a boyfriend and would feel comfortable sharing an image, and then all of a sudden everyone had it. And all of a sudden it was online. And all of a sudden it was all anyone could talk about on social media. And the total, all-encompassing feeling of dread and of guilt and of shame that they felt, even though that should never have been theirs. It should have been on the person that shared that image. And so we do live in a very challenging time as it relates to our children seeing these things and being involved with them. And sometimes I think it's tough, particularly for someone like me, for some of the men in this chamber, to understand how it feels to be in these situations. We've heard, through time, people talk about, well, why didn't you just leave? Well, since I've been about 12 years old, I've been this size. So I have always had the opportunity to walk out of any room that I'm in. And so you have to set that paradigm aside sometimes and remember that that is not the case for everybody. And that for too many people, they feel stuck and they feel rooted. And there's a level of manipulation, whether it's financial or whether it's that guilt and that shame, whether it's, if you leave me, I'll tell about this or that or the other thing. And people don't feel that they have that opportunity to be able to get out of a situation like that. And, that's something that I became more aware of when I was the chair of the Belleville Police Services Board. And I would talk with officers about what they were seeing out in the field. And I would talk with them about the victims. And thankfully, through the community safety and policing grants, we got money just recently for victim support to make sure that those victims, when they come to the police service, are met by someone who has a trauma-informed response, are met by someone who is going to take them seriously, who is going to make sure that they're heard, and the huge impact that that has on these predominantly women that are trying to flee these situations, to make sure that when they express their situation, what's happened to them, that they're taken seriously and that they're believed. And we know how hard it is for victims to talk about what's happened to them. And so to make them go through that over and over and over again before getting any services, it's just unacceptable. And that's what our government is standing up for today, to say that we have an action plan to end intimate partner violence, but it begins with passing this motion, going back to committee, looking at that excellent report from the member of Kitchener South Hespeler, and really diving more deeply into this. Those intimate partner violence hearings, I was asked, sort of last minute if I would participate. And, I had some apprehension. I was nervous about the types of things that I might hear. And I've been very privileged in my life that, I didn't see any violence in the home. That just wasn't something that was top of mind for us. And so I had to learn about it, through other experience. I had to learn about it as I walked through the world. As I mentioned, I was a pretty big kid. I was about this size at 12 years old. And that was about the time that I noticed that when I was walking down the street, women were crossing to the other side. And I didn't understand why. And I remember talking to my parents about that. Is it something I'm doing? Is it the way I look? And I was almost at first a little bit offended. I'm going, I'm a nice guy. If you're walking through a dark alley, you should hope to find me. I'll help you get through. But, what I found from my parents was that this was a conditioned response. And it was a conditioned response from the fact that too often, people who look like me don't use their power responsibly. And they use their power to intimidate other people, and to belittle other people, and to coerce an action out of someone else. And so every time I would see a woman cross the street when I was walking towards them, and even now, every time I get into an elevator, you can feel it. You can feel the fear and the concern. And that's why it's so important to make sure that not only are women leading this charge, but men have to come to the table as well and understand that we have to see this through a different paradigm, that we have to understand how it feels to someone else. Those hearings, as I mentioned, were really challenging for me. I have a wife who I love very dearly. I have 3 daughters. And when I listen to those stories and those women talk about the abuse that they have been subjected to, the coercion, as I mentioned, whether it's from being isolated from your friends and your family, whether it's from being cut off financially and being told, you have nowhere to go if you're not with me. We even heard one particular instance where a woman expressed that she had been forced to carry the child of her abuser, and that then became an anchor to tie her to him, and that she felt that she couldn't leave because that would mean that her daughter didn't have a father, but that she knew that father was going to continue to abuse both her and very likely that child. And these are really difficult things to hear, and every day when I would leave that committee, the first thing that I would do is I would call my wife, and I would just talk to her. I wouldn't talk to her about what had happened that day. I just wanted to hear her voice. I just wanted to know, how things had gone for her. And it gave me a little bit of peace knowing that my wife will never have to go through that my daughters will never have to see that in their home. But when you are the father of daughters, it's something that you do have to think about. Am I doing the right things to protect them from what might be waiting for them out in the world? And I think certainly one of the best things you can do is not exhibit that behavior in your own home, right? My daughters will never see it be normalized. They'll never think, well, that's just something that happens amongst mommies and daddies, because it's not, and it's not acceptable. And those, take a quick break here. The challenge is that, when kids see those things in the home, they think that that's how people behave. And from my perspective, I think about my daughter's futures, and I think about what happens if they were ever in a situation that they felt that they couldn't leave, where they were being abused, where they were being exploited. Could you imagine saying to your daughter, you have to report this guy. It's not okay what he's doing. And then she looks back at you and says, but you never reported mom. Or mom never reported you, rather. Or if you said to your daughter, you have to leave this relationship, this isn't healthy. And then she can turn around and look at you and say, well, but mom didn't leave, right? It's so important that we make sure that our kids, male and female, understand that this is not okay, because this is a generational thing. What kids learn in the home, they exhibit when they leave the home. And so it's so important that we have everyone on board. and that we commit to doing better, and that we commit to talking about it, and that we commit to, as men, holding other men accountable. When I was on the Police Services Board, I found out exactly how pervasive intimate partner violence was in my community. And it made me sick thinking, how many times did I go into a store and the person behind the counter had abused their spouse before I got there? Or had I shaken hands with these people? Or had I done something to help them and encourage them and not even realize what they were doing in our community? So it's important to make sure that, as brave as the women are that have come forward and expressed what it was like to have been victimized, and to tell their story, and to have to relive that trauma and that pain, and you could see it on their faces, that this was an uncomfortable thing for them to have to do. But the bravery that they exhibited, and many of them, detailing horrific events that they had experienced, there needs to be an action to that. There needs to be a closing of that loop. They came in and they bared their souls for us, and they told us what they had been through, and there is an expectation from them that will result in something. And the motion that we have before us today is to close that loop. We are saying, why don't we take this report, go back to committee, and close that loop for all those women who are willing to come in to a cold setting with a bunch of people in suits sitting around a table and have to publicly tell their story. We need to make sure that we complete this for them and that something comes out of this. And I'm so thankful for the minister and for my colleague from Kitchener South Hespeler, because I know that is going to occur, right? That these women will not have been asked to come down and to express what's happened to them in vain, that this will mean something. And as I look out across the House today, I see all of my colleagues, and I know that they all want that to have meant something. That they want that sacrifice and that pain and that re-traumatization and all of that came along with the bravery that they exhibited on that day, they want it to mean something. And that's what we're asking here for today. We're asking to please let us close that loop. Let's get something out there and let's take more action. Our government has done a number of things, but we know that we have to do better. And that's what part of this is making sure that as we move forward, we continue to do better. So what is the goal of all of this, right? We've all talked about it a lot. We've got this report. We're going to go back to committee, hopefully, if the motion passes. But we want to have a future where this doesn't continue to be an issue, where there is no more intimate partner violence, where women don't have to be afraid and don't have to feel tethered to someone that should be giving them the love and the care that they deserve, and instead is visiting violence upon them. How do we get to that point? Well, it's things like this. It's things like making sure we close that loop for those people that came in and expressed their stories to us. It's things like making sure that our sons know that it is not acceptable. It doesn't matter if you're drunk. It doesn't matter if you were stressed. It doesn't matter if you had a bad day at work. It doesn't matter if she made a mistake. And it doesn't matter what she said to you. It's never acceptable to put your hands on someone like that. Thank you. And it's equally important for our daughters to know that if he says it only happens when I'm angry, don't believe him. If he says it only happens when I'm drunk, don't believe him. These are not normative things. This is not something that is excusable. There's not a good reason for it. It is not your fault, and that you will be supported, whether it's by your family, by your community, or in the courts by your government, that coming forward will mean something and that you won't have to continue in this terrible situation. And I think about some of the great organizations in my community, like the Three Oaks Women's Shelter, who helps women get out of those situations. Because again, there's an economic piece to this. Women who can't afford to leave have to stay in these terrible situations. We need to make sure that those women can be extracted from those situations, can be put into supportive housing, and can help rebuild their lives with all the different tools that they need, whether that's skills training, whether that's economic reconciliation, or in terms of having the money they need to go out and get an apartment, to be able to take care of their kids, to not have to stay in an abusive situation. And so, as we talked about, this is something that has gone on for a very long time, really since human beings have existed. but that doesn't mean that it's something that has to continue to happen, right? We can evolve, we can get better, we can do more. And that's what this government is doing, and that's why we have this motion before us today. And again, it's not about, we talk endemic, epidemic. It's not a word game. It's not some partisan, you said this, so we'll say that. It's about recognizing the problem as it exists and as it has existed for millennia now, right? This is something that is with us. This is something that is embedded in our culture. This is something that continues to be in our music, in our movies, in our video games. And we have to make those changes as well. But it's important to make sure that whether it's young men or young women or anybody out there, that they understand that they will be supported if they come forward and that there is no excusing intimate partner violence. So as I look to close, this is something that brings us into line with the World Health Organization. This is not a term that we have created. It's also one that scholars and members of the opposition have previously identified as well, that this is a long-term problem that requires longer-term, serious solutions, not something that's just popping up today. And I think all of us, when we look inside ourselves, we know that. We know how long this has been in our communities. And as I said earlier, I'm very thankful that I didn't experience it in the home. But even now, when I see my kids at school, we're in that kindergarten drop-off line. You can see it. There's those kids that come in that don't have their backpack, don't have their coat, their mother looks tired, and you just know there's something going on there. And even my daughters, as they've gone into school now, my oldest is 6, my twins are 4.5, there's been boys that have run up and just punched them in the face. And of course, as a father, it makes you furious. And you want to make sure that that kid is held accountable and that this doesn't happen anymore. And that your daughters, when they go to school, are not going to be victimized. But then there's the other side of me that knows that that kid learned that somewhere. That didn't just happen. And that it's likely something that they've seen in the home. And so it's an involved process. We have to hold the monsters that do this accountable. That grown men should never be doing this, and it is predominantly men, should never be doing this to their partners. We also have to make sure that when people come forward that they're believed, that they feel supported, and that they know that real justice will happen. And we have to make sure that as best as we can, we protect families from the fallout of these situations. No one wants to be in a situation where families are splitting up. But often in these situations, that is the best thing that can happen, to remove those kids and to remove that woman from this terrible situation. So I thank all my colleagues for hearing me out today. There's a number of tools that I've used in this chamber, and some of you may have seen them. Often humor, often preparation and force, and I didn't have any of those tools today. And so I just wanted to speak from the heart directly to my colleagues about what this issue means to me, why it's so important that we pass this legislation, that we pass this motion, that we go back to committee, that we close the loop for all of those victims who came in and talked to us, and that they know that they will be supported and understood by their government. So I want to thank everybody for hearing me out today. I want to thank the Associate Minister of Women's Economic. They give us they're too long, these names, right? I got economic development, job creation, trade. I mean, it's women's social and economic opportunity. The member from Kitchener South Hespeler for the incredible work that you've done. And I hope that as I look out across the aisle, that my colleagues will support this motion and make sure that we get justice for all of those women that came in, that spoke to us during those committee days, which I know were tough days for all of us, but all we had to do was sit there and hear them. Think of how hard it was for them. They deserve to have this loop closed. They deserve to have justice. And we all deserve to go into a future without intimate partner violence. Thank you very much.
I recognize the member from Thunder Bay Superior North.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And it is an honour to have the opportunity to speak on this issue of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. Now, I remember, I'm quite a bit older than some of the people who have spoken today, and I remember in the 70s when there were no crisis, there were no shelters, there were no rape crisis centres. And I do remember that the women who organized to put those things in place were roundly ridiculed in every public forum, but they persisted. But I have to say that, you know, I don't know if you've seen these photographs of people with signs up with gray hair saying, "I can't believe I still have to protest this." And that's what I feel about where we are right now. We've learned a lot, and I just want to say I'm not sure that violence is embedded in gender-based violence is embedded in our human nature. It's embedded in patriarchy. It's embedded in an ideology, in a way of thinking that says that not only are men entitled, but if they don't feel in control, then there must be something wrong. There is something in that ideology that really creates pressure, and it harms men, too. And it certainly harms men who don't fit I'm going to say the standard male stereotype that you see on most television shows. I think of CIS or CSI and what they look like. You know, they're all buff and they're all strong and occasionally sensitive, but
that's optional.
Yeah, it's optional. So that, you know, partly what has encouraged me, and one of the members across the aisle mentioned this Coaching Boys into Men program that. There's one taking place with football players in Thunder Bay, and I was quite excited to see that and read about that. It was also interesting for me to note, though, that it's being paid for by one of the women's shelters, that they're actually sponsoring the program. And then I think, okay, well, it's shifting the thinking about how to address this problem, but it's also probably taking funding out of direct shelter services. And then I also see that the Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Centre is sponsoring programs, and Thunder Bay Counselling is sponsoring programs, all for young men. And I think that is a very, very positive step forward. But I think it's also important to know that, you know, in Thunder Bay, we have actually the highest rates of intimate partner violence in Ontario. Yeah. It's, here we go. Thunder Bay Police Service, in just 1 week in October 2025, they received 31 calls related to intimate partner violence. And apparently we've got, you know, about 700 per 1,000 people, which is more than double the provincial average. So really, why is this case the case in our particular community? And I think there are lots of reasons. I do think that it's still taboo to talk about it. So when I was a young person, there was violence in my house. My stepfather was beating my younger sister and was also beating my mother. And I stood up against him at one point, so he threw me, he whacked me over the head too. So we went, we talked to the police. There was nothing really at that time. And we then went to our church, and you know what? The minister sided with my stepfather, right? Must be us. And then we even went to counseling at the time. And the counselor said, "What are you doing to make your stepfather behave like this towards you?" I hope that's changed. But nobody was talking about it. And yet it was happening up and down the street, and you'd kind of get these little bits and pieces that you'd hear fighting and crashing in somebody else's house, and you realize, oh, this is not just my house. This is happening in other places too. And what saved me at the time was the women's movement, which the second wave of the women's movement, which started at the end of the 60s into the early 70s. I was a high school student, and I started to discover this and realized, oh, okay, there's something going on here that's not just about my house. It's not just about the relationship between people in this house. There's something much bigger and more systemic going on here. And that was really, really important. And I guess that is why I go to that poster and say, okay, that was the 70s, this is 2025, and we're still dealing with the same issues. But I'm not prepared to say that it's human nature. I am much more prepared to say there are ideologies and narratives that get repeated over and over and over again. I think of, for a while I was living with some young kids, and they watched Cars. Remember that movie, Cars? Yeah, they just loved it. And I kept looking at it, and there were the boy cars, and there were the girl cars. And the boy cars were tough and manly and you know, winning whatever it was. I don't even know what the movie was about. I just saw these caricatures, and I thought, okay, nothing's changed, right? And here we are indoctrinating little kids with these gender-based ideologies and behaviors. In fact, there was another little kid I met. He was only 2, right? He came in the house and he goes, "Boo, boo, boo, boo. I'm going to be a truck driver." And he's 2, but he's pushed his voice way down as far as he could go, and he's puffed up his shoulders. And then, where did he get this from? He's only 2 years old. So I do think that it's an ongoing battle. There's no question about that. There are dominant discourses that teach children and reinforce it as we get older, that there's certain relationships that somehow are normal. And those relationships are based on power and assumptions and a sense of entitlement. So, you know, where are we here in this legislature? It does concern me that there's a report coming out that's going to be written by one person, and it'll be discussed in closed doors. That seems contrary to practice in this legislature. I've also always wondered why we needed to go reinvent the wheel in the first place with this committee. I can go to the website